In the annals of human history, amidst the ebb and flow of civilizations, there exists a timeless philosophy that transcends the boundaries of time and space, Stoicism. Born amidst the tumult of ancient Greece and nurtured in the crucible of Roman society, Stoicism stands as a beacon of unwavering resolve in an ever-changing world. It offers us a roadmap to inner peace and resilience, guiding us through the labyrinth of life's trials and tribulations with stoic composure and unwavering equanimity. But what is Stoicism, and why has it endured the test of time? To answer these questions, we must journey back to the dawn of Western philosophy, to the bustling streets of Athens, where the seeds of Stoicism were first sown. The Stoic philosophy traces its origins to the teachings of Zeno of Citium, a humble philosopher who founded the Stoic school in the early 3rd century BCE. Drawing inspiration from the works of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, Zeno sought to distill the essence of virtue and wisdom into a practical philosophy that could guide individuals towards a life of eudaimonia, flourishing and fulfillment. Central to the Stoic worldview is the concept of virtue, or arete, which encompasses wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. The Stoics believed that true happiness and fulfillment could only be attained by living in accordance with these virtues, cultivating an inner harmony that transcends the transient pleasures and pains of the material world. At the heart of Stoic philosophy lies the recognition of the dichotomy of control, the notion that there are things within our power and things beyond our control. While we may not always have control over external events, we do have control over our own thoughts, attitudes, and actions. By focusing our efforts on cultivating virtue and exercising our agency in accordance with reason, we can attain a state of inner tranquility and resilience that is impervious to the vagaries of fortune. One of the most renowned figures in the Stoic tradition is Epictetus, a former slave-turned-philosopher whose teachings have inspired countless generations. In his seminal work, the Enchiridion, or Handbook, Epictetus offers practical advice for living a life of virtue and resilience in the face of adversity. He teaches us that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Epictetus emphasizes the importance of cultivating an attitude of detachment towards external outcomes, recognizing that true freedom lies in mastering our own thoughts and desires. He encourages us to embrace the practice of negative visualization, contemplating the worst-case scenarios with sober detachment in order to inoculate ourselves against the sting of disappointment. Another towering figure in the Stoic tradition is Seneca, a statesman and philosopher who served as an advisor to the Roman Emperor Nero. In his letters and essays, Seneca expounds upon the Stoic virtues and offers practical advice for living a life of wisdom and resilience in the face of adversity. Seneca teaches us that true happiness and fulfillment can only be attained by living in accordance with nature, cultivating an inner harmony that is impervious to the vicissitudes of fortune. He reminds us that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality, urging us to confront our fears and insecurities with unwavering courage. But Stoicism is more than just a theoretical philosophy, it is a way of life, a set of practical principles and rituals that can guide us towards a life of inner peace and resilience. In the pages that follow, we will explore the Stoic rituals for daily resilience, drawing upon the wisdom of the ancients to navigate the tumultuous currents of modern life with Stoic composure and unwavering equanimity. Join me, dear reader, as we embark upon this journey of self-discovery and transformation, guided by the timeless wisdom of the Stoic sages. Together, we shall explore the depths of the human soul and cultivate the virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance that lie dormant within us. For in the crucible of adversity, we shall forge the steel of our souls, tempered by the fires of wisdom and fortified by the virtues of Stoic philosophy. In the labyrinth of existence, where chaos reigns supreme and uncertainty looms large, we find ourselves tossed amidst the tempest of life's trials and tribulations. Yet, in the heart of this storm, there lies a beacon of unwavering resolve, Stoicism, an ancient philosophy that serves as our guiding light amidst the darkness. Picture, if you will, the towering figure of Marcus Aurelius, a titan among men, facing the tumult of war and the burdens of leadership with Stoic composure. In his seminal work, Meditations, he imparts wisdom that transcends the ages, reminding us that the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. But how do we cultivate such thoughts in a world besieged by chaos and uncertainty? How do we forge the armor of resilience to withstand life's relentless onslaughts? The answer lies in the daily rituals of Stoicism, rituals that fortify the soul and nurture the indomitable spirit within. At the break of dawn, as the world awakens from its slumber, we embark upon the first ritual of the day, the morning meditation. In the quiet solitude of our minds, we reflect upon the Stoic virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. We summon the wisdom of Epictetus, who teaches us that men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them. With each breath, we release the shackles of attachment to external outcomes, embracing instead the immutable power of our own thoughts and actions. We cultivate an inner sanctuary of tranquility, impervious to the tumultuous currents of fate. As the day unfolds, we encounter myriad challenges and obstacles that threaten to derail our equanimity. Yet, armed with the Stoic principle of the dichotomy of control, we navigate these turbulent waters with unwavering resolve. We heed the words of Seneca, who reminds us that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. In moments of adversity, we embrace the practice of negative visualization, contemplating the worst-case scenarios with sober detachment. In doing so, we inoculate ourselves against the sting of disappointment, cultivating a resilience that transcends the ephemeral fluctuations of fortune. But perhaps the greatest challenge we face lies not in the external trials that beset us, but in the inner demons that lurk within. The Stoics understood that true freedom lies in mastering the passions that threaten to engulf us: anger, fear, and desire. Through the practice of self-examination, we shine a light into the darkest recesses of our souls, confronting our fears and insecurities with unwavering courage. We recognize that true strength lies not in the absence of fear, but in the mastery of it, in the ability to harness its energy and channel it towards virtuous ends. And so, as the day draws to a close and the shadows lengthen, we embark upon the final ritual of the evening reflection. In the stillness of the night, we take stock of the day's triumphs and tribulations, cultivating an attitude of gratitude for the blessings bestowed upon us. In the crucible of daily life, Stoicism offers us a guiding philosophy, a roadmap to inner peace and resilience in the face of life's adversities. It beckons us to embrace the virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, to cultivate a spirit of indomitable resilience that transcends the fleeting vicissitudes of fortune. So let us heed the call of the Stoics, my friends, and embark upon this journey of self-discovery and transformation. For in the crucible of adversity, we shall forge the steel of our souls, tempered by the fires of wisdom and fortified by the virtues of Stoic philosophy. Daily rituals play a crucial role in cultivating a resilient mindset rooted in Stoic principles. These rituals serve as anchors amidst the tumult of daily life, providing a framework for navigating challenges with clarity, courage, and equanimity. Let us delve into some of these rituals, inspired by the timeless wisdom of Stoicism. 1. Morning meditation. At the break of dawn, before the hustle and bustle of the day begins, carve out a few moments for morning meditation. Find a quiet space where you can sit in contemplation, free from distractions. Begin by reflecting on the Stoic virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Visualize yourself embodying these virtues throughout the day, facing challenges with clarity and resilience. Draw inspiration from the words of Marcus Aurelius, who reminds us that waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. B1. 2. Journaling and reflection. Throughout the day, take time to journal and reflect on your thoughts and experiences. Write down moments of gratitude, challenges overcome, and lessons learned. Use this practice to cultivate self-awareness and mindfulness, observing your thoughts and emotions with detached curiosity. Seneca advises us to examine your thoughts, watch the motives that control them. By engaging in regular reflection, we gain insight into our inner workings and develop the capacity to respond to life's challenges with wisdom and resilience. 3. Stoic affirmations. Incorporate Stoic affirmations into your daily routine to reinforce positive beliefs and attitudes. Repeat phrases such as "I am resilient in the face of adversity," "I embrace the dichotomy of control," and "I live in accordance with virtue." By affirming these Stoic principles, you internalize them and cultivate a resilient mindset that is impervious to external circumstances. As Epictetus teaches us, men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them. 4. Evening reflection. As the day draws to a close, engage in an evening reflection to review your experiences and accomplishments. Take stock of moments of virtue and areas for growth, acknowledging both your strengths and weaknesses with honesty and humility. Seneca advises us to set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, "Is this the condition that I feared?" 5. Mindful pause. Throughout the day, incorporate mindful pauses into your routine to center yourself and reconnect with the present moment. Take a few deep breaths, observing the sensations of your breath as it enters and leaves your body. Use this practice to anchor yourself in the here and now, letting go of worries about the past or future. By cultivating mindfulness, you develop the capacity to respond to life's challenges with clarity and composure. These daily rituals, inspired by the wisdom of Stoicism, serve as powerful tools for fostering a resilient mindset in the face of life's inevitable challenges. By incorporating these practices into your routine, you cultivate virtues such as wisdom, courage, and temperance, guiding you towards a life of inner peace and fulfillment. As Marcus Aurelius reminds us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. 6. Stoic reading and reflection. Incorporate a dedicated time each day for reading Stoic literature and reflecting on its teachings. Choose texts from Stoic philosophers such as Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, or contemporary authors who expound upon Stoic principles. As you read, pause to reflect on the passages that resonate with you deeply. Consider how you can apply these teachings to your own life and challenges you may be facing. By immersing yourself in Stoic wisdom daily, you reinforce your commitment to living a life of virtue and resilience. 7. Stoic visualization practice. Engage in a Stoic visualization practice to prepare yourself mentally and emotionally for the challenges that lie ahead. Take a few moments each day to visualize potential obstacles and setbacks, imagining yourself confronting them with courage and equanimity. Visualize yourself embodying the Stoic virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance in the face of adversity. By rehearsing these scenarios in your mind, you prime yourself to respond to challenges with resilience and clarity when they arise in reality. 8. Stoic gratitude ritual. Cultivate a daily practice of Stoic gratitude to foster a mindset of abundance and appreciation. Take time each day to reflect on the blessings in your life, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Write down 3 things you're grateful for, whether it's the warmth of the sun on your face, the laughter of loved ones, or the opportunity to pursue your passions. As you cultivate gratitude, you shift your focus from what you lack to what you have, fostering a sense of contentment and resilience in the face of life's ups and downs. 9. Stoic contemplation of mortality. Embrace a daily practice of contemplating your own mortality to gain perspective on life's fleeting nature and the urgency of living virtuously. Set aside time each day to reflect on the impermanence of life and the inevitability of death. Contemplate the brevity of existence and the uncertainty of the future, recognizing that each moment is precious and deserving of your full attention and commitment. By embracing the reality of mortality, you cultivate a sense of urgency and purpose in living according to Stoic principles, making the most of the time you have. 10. Stoic acts of kindness. Integrate acts of kindness and compassion into your daily routine as a manifestation of Stoic virtue in action. Look for opportunities to extend a helping hand, offer words of encouragement, or lend a listening ear to those in need. Practice empathy and understanding towards others, recognizing their inherent dignity and humanity. By embodying the Stoic virtues of benevolence and compassion, you cultivate a sense of interconnectedness with others and deepen your resilience in the face of adversity. These additional Stoic-inspired rituals provide further avenues for cultivating resilience and fortifying your mindset against life's challenges. By incorporating these practices into your daily routine with intention and dedication, you harness the transformative power of Stoic philosophy to live a life of virtue, wisdom, and inner peace. As Epictetus reminds us, practice yourself, for heaven's sake, in little things, and thence proceed to greater. In conclusion, the practice of Stoic rituals offers a profound framework for cultivating resilience, fortifying the mind, and navigating life's challenges with grace and equanimity. As we reflect on the wisdom of Stoicism and its practical applications in our daily lives, let us consider additional tips and tricks to deepen our engagement with this ancient philosophy. 1. Consistency is key. Consistency is paramount in Stoic practice. Commit to integrating these rituals into your daily routine with unwavering dedication. Just as a sculptor chisels away at marble to reveal the beauty within, so too must we diligently chip away at our habits and thought patterns to cultivate virtue and resilience. 2. Adapt and evolve. While the core principles of Stoicism remain timeless, the application of these principles may vary depending on individual circumstances. Remain open to adapting and evolving your Stoic practice as needed, recognizing that flexibility is essential in navigating the complexities of life. 3. Community and support. Seek out community and support networks of like-minded individuals who share your commitment to Stoic philosophy. Engage in discussions, share experiences, and offer encouragement to one another on the journey towards wisdom and virtue. By surrounding yourself with a supportive community, you amplify the power of Stoic practice and draw strength from collective wisdom. 4. Embrace discomfort. Stoicism teaches us to embrace discomfort as a catalyst for growth and self-discovery. Lean into challenges and adversity with courage and resilience, recognizing that discomfort is an integral part of the human experience. By confronting our fears and insecurities head-on, we cultivate inner strength and fortitude. 5. Celebrate progress, not perfection. Practice self-compassion and celebrate progress, no matter how small or incremental. Recognize that the journey towards virtue and resilience is ongoing and imperfect. Embrace setbacks and failures as opportunities for learning and growth, reframing them as stepping stones on the path to personal transformation. 6. Cultivate mindfulness. Cultivate mindfulness in your daily life by bringing awareness to the present moment. Practice mindfulness meditation, engage in mindful eating, and incorporate moments of mindfulness throughout your day. By cultivating present moment awareness, you cultivate resilience and deepen your connection to the richness of life. 7. Find meaning in adversity. Stoicism teaches us to find meaning and purpose in adversity, viewing challenges as opportunities for growth and self-discovery. Reflect on the lessons learned from difficult experiences and extract meaning from even the most challenging circumstances. By reframing adversity as an opportunity for growth, you harness its transformative power and emerge stronger and wiser. Incorporating these tips and tricks into your Stoic practice will enhance your resilience, fortify your mindset, and deepen your engagement with the timeless wisdom of Stoicism. As you continue on your journey towards virtue and inner peace, remember the words of Epictetus, "He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has." May you find strength, wisdom, and fulfillment in the practice of Stoicism, and may your journey be guided by the virtues of courage, wisdom, justice, and temperance.